Somebody asked me recently what I thought would be the fastest way to make someone an atheist.
On this episode of Switching Sides, we're going to be looking at a Hemant Mehta video. He's the Friendly Atheist, in which he responds to the question, what's the fastest way to make someone an atheist? And I'll be looking at this from the perspective of the deconversion study that I do.
A few thoughts ran through my mind. Read the first pages of the Bible.
So when he says read the first pages of the Bible, he's talking about the creation story. And to give that some perspective, I've prepared for you a montage of YouTube atheists. Take a look.
6 millennia back in just 6 days. That's the time and length of creation I was told as a kid.
But in college, I met some people who were really interested in the book of Genesis and were specifically what you call a young earth creationist. So this is someone who believes that the book of Genesis is literal history, and that the implication from that is that the world is between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. That's when this whole thing began.
It was nearly 3 years ago when I posted this channel's very first YouTube video, deliberately provocatively titled, "Ken Ham Made Me an Atheist."
I was raised independent fundamental Baptist and my family was very devout. We strongly believed in creationism.
When I looked into this, I basically learned that no matter what scientific discipline you start from, the evidence points overwhelmingly to a world that is very old, billions of years old, to be specific. And basically, the world doesn't really make sense unless it's ancient. I mean, there's so many things.
We didn't teach the universe was created in 6 days about 6,000 years ago like most fundamentalists believe. I won't bore you with too many details, but in that class, I learned for myself how to measure the age of the universe by multiple means and realized that the universe was closer to 13.8 billion years old than to 6,000 years.
I was taught that scientists lie about the age of the earth and lie about evolution because they're pawns of Satan who just want to live an accountability-free life of Satan.
In it, I speak about the first domino to fall for me in coming to leave my Christian faith, abandoning young earth creationism.
So is young earth creationism a statistically high driving factor in deconversion? Statistically, I couldn't tell you. I don't have statistics that would indicate that to me. If it is, it's an American problem. My European correspondents don't report that same kind of view of Scripture. It's not popular over there. It is popular in the American church as far as I can tell. Whether or not it's a driving force in general, clearly it's a driving force behind some very visible atheists, as these video clips that I've shown should indicate.
Realize that every major religion teaches that every other major religion is wrong, and they can't all be right.
This one's interesting to me because it's an artifact of the church environment. You go to a church day after day for the early part of your life, for years, and in that church, you're told that God exists and looks a certain way, as described by the scriptures in this religion. And you spend a lot of time there talking about how other religions are wrong and your religion is right. And so a binary choice is set in front of you while you're within the religion. That binary choice is either this or nothing. So it is the religion itself, it's the religious environment that eliminates the option of other religions. So we've mentioned that Bible problems are a driving force against deconversion. So over time, the scripture, sort of the foundation of this religion, is shown to be faulty. And if it's the foundation of the religion must be faulty. And if this religion is faulty, no religion is correct. Again, this binary choice is set up by the religious environment you're in. The religious environment teaches all other religions are incorrect, and so when you come to believe that this religion is incorrect, all of those other options have already been cut off for you. and so it's atheism. And that's one of the defining factors of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism sets up absolute certainty, and anything else is nihilism. So if you're in a fundamentalist church, you're given this idea that you must be absolutely certain. And if you're not absolutely certain, you're thrown into a world of uncertainty. And in that case, it's atheism for them.
Ask yourself why a good God would allow so many horrible things to happen all over the world.
So this is the so-called problem of evil. And it's a major talking point among atheists. If you listen to an atheist debate, this is one of the arguments, which is one that comes up with great frequency in these debates about the non-existence of God. It's one of the arguments that's sort of a driving force between some of these popularized atheist books. For instance, God is Not Great sort of titles itself and goes after that. And there's other books that talk about the evils of religion. Basically this idea that the existence of suffering and evil is evidence against God. So again, this is one that you see very frequently among atheists, but it's one I didn't see with a lot of frequency among deconverts during the deconversion period. Maybe after they become atheists, but it was a complaint that I didn't see with a high rate of frequency during the deconversion process. Nowhere near as high as Bible problems, which we've talked about already. So this includes case studies that I did where the problem of evil was in about the third lowest tier of complaints expressed by atheists across the case study. In polls that I've done, it's maybe about a quarter of about 25% of the complaints involved the problem of evil and suffering. And then in interviews that I've done, it was maybe about 15%. So it's difficult for me to explain why this, which is a major talking point among confirmed atheists, was not as high a complaint during the deconversion process. That's going to take further analysis.
But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't really want to answer the question. Because if all it takes for you to shed your faith and become an atheist is like 2 minutes of thinking, then maybe you haven't really thought this thing through. You know, I would take someone much more seriously if she told me she became an atheist after like a year of reading books and hearing what atheists have to say and hearing Christian apologists embarrass themselves in debates and studying up on evolution and sociology. If you do all of those things, you're really convincing yourself of how right you are.
There's a point in the deconversion process when the potential deconvert begins asking those questions, listening to those debates, and taking the atheist sides in the debates, really starting to dig in and question all the things that they believe. That happens. That's part of what is popularly known as deconstruction. But in order to begin that process, the person has to be set up for it ahead of time. Essentially, they have to experience a number of stressors, which are experiences or questions that place some kind of strain on their beliefs. Once enough of those stressors have accumulated, there's sort of a dam wall that's keeping them from asking those questions. It's sort of retaining those questions and keeping them back. That's what I call the preventative principle. It's something that really keeps you from asking the questions. Maybe it's guilt. You're sort of loyal to your Christian beliefs, and you would feel guilt if you really started asking those questions. Maybe it's fear. Maybe you're afraid you'll go to hell if you start asking those questions. Maybe it's loyalty to your church or your Christian community. You would feel disloyal or like a betrayer if you were to start asking those questions. Then some event occurs that removes that preventative principle. Frequently, that event is moving to a new environment. You hear this all the time. I went off to college and then I deconverted. Well, why would that be? Well, once you go to college and you step outside of that Christian community, that sort of pressure to conform or this feeling of loyalty that would prevent you from asking that questions, those are no longer there. Now you're in an environment where you're not surrounded by this Christian atmosphere that keeps you from asking those questions. So once that preventative principle is removed, the dam wall bursts and you start asking those questions which have been building up. And so, again, as he's indicating here, it wouldn't be one question an atheist asked during a bus ride to the Christian sitting next to them that would cause everything to come tumbling down. No, it's a process that leads up to asking those questions. So in that sense, he's absolutely right.
I hope you become atheist because all the evidence from all different areas convinces you that it makes the most sense. The Big Bang, religious hypocrisy, biblical contradictions, the fact that your pastor lies to you all the time, etc.
I want to briefly cover the points that he just made. I honestly have never heard the Big Bang brought up as an objection. It probably comes from the sort of creationist mindset that either God created or there is no God. In which case, if we can prove the Big Bang, then there is no God. Probably, but I haven't heard that directly mentioned as a contradiction before, or as a complaint before. So the next one he mentions is hypocrisy. Now this one always fascinates me because I almost never see hypocrisy as an objection from deconverts. After they've deconverted maybe, or from atheists who never converted, definitely. Hypocrisy is a big deal. Sometimes it's a big deal for people who remain in the church. But it's not something I see deconverts mention in their deconversion process very much. It's in there, but not often. The idea behind hypocrisy, while you're in the Christian church, or in religion in general, when somebody does something hypocritical in the church, there's two things involved. There's a person and there's a principle. The principle is the ethical value that they violate when they do the thing that's hypocritical, meaning that they embrace, at least they say they embrace, a certain principle, and then they violate that principle. In which case, the person who is a Christian tends to side on the principle and against the person. They say the principle's solid, the person is the one who's problematic. So that doesn't indict the system, it indicts an individual within the system. However, if you're outside the system and you see somebody violate a principle, it's more the idea that their system, their religion, it has no power to keep them honest, to keep them virtuous. So it's a stronger argument from the outside than it is from the inside. All right, so biblical contradictions. I've beaten this horse to death over several videos. Biblical contradictions is a big deal, and it's a motivating factor in conversion time after time. Finally, the pastor lies. This is something that's interesting to me because, the pastor who is saying, or Christians in general, who are saying something that they earnestly believe, obviously they're not lying. Lying would indicate that they know it's wrong and they say it's right anyway. They're just mistaken. This idea that you're being lied to tends to come after the deconversion process in what I call a deconversion crisis and the deconversion narrative forming. It's called the narrative forming. What that means is that as a atheist, you look back upon your religious experience and you reinterpret it through the eyes of an atheist. When you were in the system, you were being told the truth. Outside of the system, you realized that what you saw, what you heard, was untruthful, and therefore a lie. And so you come to the conclusion that the religious system is being deceptive. You hear this often, that you were brainwashed. Well, not intentionally, of course, because within the system, they believe it to be the truth. They're not lying, they're mistaken. But once you emerge from the system, you feel as if you've been lied to. And this is almost universal. deconverts that I study will say this pretty consistently, that they were lied to while they were in the system. So they'll look back on their religious experience during the time period they were in the experience. That was the truth. Now that they're out of this experience, that was not truth, and therefore it was lies.
So what's the one argument I would make to convince someone to become an atheist? There isn't one.
And here I'm in agreement with him. It isn't arguments that cause deconversion. It's the history of experience that precedes the argument. The argument is sort of the pin that pops the balloon of pressure that's building up in this person's life that precedes the deconversion. And at that point, they may even be looking for an argument that helps them exit the religious system. And once they're looking for that argument, as he points out, there's plenty to go on. So, again, typically they're set up by whatever their religious environment is to explore outside the religious environment. There's a prohibitive principle. There's something that's keeping them from asking those questions. That's removed somehow by some event. At that point, they start asking the questions. And then, as he points out, there's plenty of questions to ask. Once those questions have been asked, at some point down the line during this process, they realize that they no longer believe. And that's the point at which deconversion takes place. So yeah, it would be reductionist to say that, yes, there's one argument that would cause a person to become an atheist. It doesn't work like that. People are a little more complex than that. This has been Switching Sides.